Okay, and then I think we have our next speaker, Emmanuel Fontaine here. Dr. Fontaine, are you around?
I am around indeed. Good morning, everyone.
Wonderful, wonderful. Are you able to share your screen, your presentation with us?
Yes.
And then in the meantime, I'm going to introduce Dr. Fontaine. He graduated from Toulouse Veterinary School in 2004 and then continued his studies in Paris with the domestic carnivore unit of the reproduction department there. He also worked at a research center for reproduction between 2005 and 2011. And he is also qualified from the European College of Animal Reproduction and also completed a PhD in 2012 on the use of GnRH agonists in dogs. And he's also been working for Rural Canyon as well. And we are so excited to have him here today to speak for us on cat nutrition today. So thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you so much, Petra, for your kind introduction. So if you can just confirm me that you can see my screen and see my presentation.
Yes, absolutely. We can see it very well.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you guys are around the world. It's currently 11 a.m. here in Waterloo, Ontario, in Canada. And I'm super excited to join you to discuss with you this topic, which I've been presenting for quite a while now, which is about nutrition and reproduction and how you guys in your cat breeding, in your catteries can actually leverage nutrition as a tool to optimize really the reproductive success. And let me explain you, give you a little bit of background here and story. You see, I worked for almost 10 years at the vet school of Paris, working with cat breeders like you guys. And we were doing tons of stuff like we were working on infertility, we were doing consultations on trying to do artificial insemination, etc. We were doing a lot about reproduction, pathology of reproduction, etc. But during those 10 years I worked at the vet school, must admit I never really discussed nutrition and reproduction with our cat breeders, because I always assumed that, you know, it was a no-brainer. You guys knew what to do. You guys had a good sense of the best thing to do there. And when I joined Royal Canin, I started having more and more discussion about nutrition in reproduction. I mean, it's kind of obvious based on my background and based on where I'm working now. And this is where I realized that there are lots of questions, lots of misconceptions that we are going to tackle during this presentation. And the goal of this presentation is really to give you the tools and the concepts that you can leverage to optimize, again, your reproductive success. You see, when I talk about cat breeding, I always go back to my cat breeding dashboards, as I call them, those measures I think every cat breeder should have, that kind of give you an idea of where you stand. It's a benchmark you can use to evaluate your cattery somehow. Obviously, the ones I use are only about reproduction, but you see, I focus on fertility. I focus on dystocia, difficulty to give birth. This number might look high for some of you guys, less than 15%. When we look at the scientific literature, very often we say that cats do not have so many dystocia compared to dogs, especially. In my career, I must have done maybe for 100 C-sections I would do in dogs, I would do one in cats. However, when it comes to purebred cats, this 15% is a number that comes back very often. And same thing for neonatal mortality. All studies agree that we want it to be below 20%. So you see, those three dashboards are key numbers that I really encourage you to evaluate, because it gives you in an instant an idea of where you stand. And if you're below those numbers I show you there, it means you're doing a great job. But I know when we are called, very often you're above those numbers. And the reason I'm showing you that, you see, it's those numbers, as I said, are very important for me when I measure the efficiency of a cattery. And today we're talking about nutrition. I'm not going to tell you that if you use nutrition, all those numbers are just going to go up. That would be awesome. I would love to have a product I could recommend that do that. But nutrition is about answering 3 questions. What, which diet you're using, how much you're feeding, and how you're using this diet. And today we're really going to focus on how do we optimize those 3 parameters. And by optimizing those, I can guarantee you will optimize those numbers that are next to me on the slide. And this is really what it is about. Nutrition is not going to solve all of your problems, but it can definitely help, and it can definitely optimize a lot of stuff there. And I'm going to start by sharing with you a tool that I think all of you should have, all of you should be familiar with. And this tool is this one. It's a body condition score system. This one is done by the World Small Animal Veterinary Association. You just Google it, WSAVA body condition score cat, and you will find this document. And I really believe this is where we all start. Rule of thumb, we only breed cats which are in an optimal body condition. Ideal body condition is this score between 4 and 5. And I really want to emphasize that, because you see, when I was working at the vet school, I always believed that this was a no-brainer. That was not something worth discussing, because you guys compete in cat shows. Your cat must be in good body condition score in order to win. That's how I was perceiving it. And then I read this study from 2013, which actually was done in the Netherlands, if I'm correct, but it shows you the percentage of cats that are overweight or obese in cat shows. And the number is very, I was surprised about this number, to be honest, because they evaluated that 5.5% of cats, of show cats, are overweight, and 4.5% of them are obese. So obviously we are talking about a very specific situation here, a very specific country. It might vary from one country to the other, but I see this number, honestly, as a great reminder that we always need to keep this in mind. Optimal body condition is essential, because when you have an individual which is overweight or obese, or even underweight, be aware that we always see fat as a tissue that stores energy. And the more fat we have, the more energy reserves we have. But fat is also an endocrine tissue. It secretes hormones, sex hormones especially, like estrogens, progesterone, testosterone, or it does not secrete enough to see clinical manifestations, so to speak. But the reproductive function is all about balance. And when you have those kind of parasitic secretions of hormones, it can disrupt this balance, and it can potentially lead to certain conditions. We know that overweight individuals have an increase in body temperature. This increase in body temperature, I can tell you, eggs don't like it. Spermatozoa, they don't like it. Very often, actually, the fat infiltrate the scrotum in male cats, and that locally increases the temperature. And this local increase, an increase by 0.5 degrees Celsius, is enough to stop the spermatogenesis. And what is interesting is that in other species, in one in particular, which is the human species, there are some diseases that are actually associated with abnormal body condition. One of them, which is very well known, is PCOS, which stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. So we know today that in humans, there is a correlation between the development of this disease and the body condition. I'm not going to tell you that it's common in cats. I've seen more ovarian cysts in dogs that are actually overweight. In cats, ovarian cysts are not common. They do exist, but they are not common. But that's, again, a reminder that fat is not only about energy reserve. It secretes hormones. It can disrupt the reproductive function. It's also it creates a state of chronic inflammation. And this can also be detrimental. So altogether, I think this is a really important takeaway as we start. But when it comes to nutrition and reproduction, it's all about fit bodies. It's really a rule of thumb, honestly. Only breed cats in optimal body condition. Might sound trivial, But in my opinion, that's really where we should start. And I showed you the body condition score, which I think all of you guys should have a look at and try to learn how to do that. If you're not confident, you can definitely work with your veterinarian so that they can teach you and show you and help you in understanding how to better use this tool. And we live in a beautiful era. Some of you might be familiar with ChatGPT. ChatGPT now has a feature called ChatGPT Visio. You take a picture of a bike and you say, oh, there's a problem with this bike. How do I fix it? And it gives you an answer. Just so you know, I tried that with the body condition score of cats. The answer I got back was, unfortunately, we cannot evaluate the body condition score of the cat, even if they are aware of the concept, because it needs a clinical examination, blah, blah, blah. But I can foresee a future where we would have tools like that, where you would just grab your phone, take a picture of the cat, maybe multiple pictures, and an AI will be able to give you an answer, an accurate answer on the evaluation of the body condition. So we're not there yet, but I see this in ultrasounds in veterinary medicine. Some of my colleagues are using AI actually to better evaluate the ultrasound pictures, and I found that great. So I wouldn't be surprised that in a few years we will have a tool like that you could leverage. And again, it might sound trivial, but this is where it all starts when it comes to nutrition. When it comes to nutrition in cats, there is this graph, which for a nerd like me looks beautiful. Look at that, numbers, percentages, and you might think like, this guy is crazy. Why? What does he see there? But this graph here basically tells you how much weight the female is going to gain during a normal gestation. And this graph here actually tells you everything there is to know about how to feed a queen during gestation, which is a very, very important parameter in any breeding cattery, in my opinion, because the way you feed the queen during gestation is going to influence the survival rate of the newborns. It's going to influence her ability to lactate, to produce milk. It's going to influence the vitality of newborn kittens right after birth. So again, this is where it all starts here. And you see this part here basically tells you that during gestation, cats should, at the end of their gestation, they should be something like 15 to 40% above their optimal body weight. So that goes back to what we were saying before. When you breed cats, you must know, you must have a very clear idea of what is their optimal body weight. And that also tells us how we need to feed them during gestation. You see, very often when I was at the vet school back in the days, I always thought that, oh, cats, they're just small dogs. We will feed them the same way. Because even in cats, the embryos will take 70% of their final body weight during the last 20 days of gestation. However, cats have one thing which is very different, and that's concerning their lactation. During gestation, cats need to make some reserves to be able to maintain their lactation afterwards, because they will never be able to maintain their lactation just with the food you're going to give them during lactation. And we'll talk about this later, but lactation is the most energy demanding life stage. So in cats, as soon as they're bred, what we recommend is to increase their energy intake by plus 10% per week until the end of gestation. Very different from dogs, because in dogs, we would do that only after 42 days of gestation. In cats, we will start right from the beginning, because we want those cats to make those fat reserves during gestation so that they can properly maintain lactation. And you see this is a linear growth. So if you like math like me, you can actually monitor the weight gain during gestations of your cat. And you want this weight gain to stay between this range of 15 to 40%. It's a basic linear regression, very easy to do. And that's something that you can basically track. I had clients in the past who were telling me, hey, doc, we do a great job as a follow-up for those cats until we do the pregnancy diagnosis. But after the pregnancy diagnosis, very often there's this big gap, this 40 days during which we do nothing. Actually, one thing you can do is just to weight those females on a regular basis and check their weight gain. This weight gain is actually something that can give you an idea if you're feeding them properly. Typically during gestation in a queen, we will recommend to use a growth diet here, a diet meant for kitten or a diet meant specifically for gestation. Those diets might be supplemented with folic acid in order to prevent cleft palates. We don't have as many studies in cats than what we have in dogs today, but cleft palate is still the #1 congenital abnormality we see in all mammalian species, and that's by default. Today, I recommend to supplement with folic acid during gestation. I really think that's a simple way to prevent this from happening. Obviously, you will not prevent those cleft palates that are related to genetics or to teratogens. And by the way, quick reminder, never administer a drug to a pregnant queen without discussing it first with your veterinarian, because certain drugs, I'm thinking antifungal drugs, for instance, corticosteroids, certain types of antibiotics, they could potentially lead to the development of those malformations. So quick reminder, because cleft palate is not only about nutrition and genetics, it's also about this thing. And I think this is where you need to have a very strong partnership with your veterinarians. The other part which is interesting is, as I said there, because before those females are going to give birth, you want to see this 25 to 40% weight gain above optimal body weight. And that's, in my opinion, a good marker that you did a good job of feeding them during gestation. And this is where, again, of course, we're talking about biology here. Biology and mathematics are things that are very different, but it gives us some pointers. And I think that's a great start, because in the past we were just, watching them developing their gestation, crossing fingers and hoping for the best. Today we can be a bit more accurate. We have the tools and we have the knowledge. So that is something I would definitely encourage you guys to track. It's not complex, it's not rocket science, and it can give you some good pointers and tell you if you're feeding them properly or not. And really, this graph, in my opinion, is super important, because it can help you identify if those females are not gaining enough weight during gestation. If they're not gaining enough weight during gestation, probably because maybe they're not receiving enough energy, enough nutrients, that might be a problem, because the kittens at birth, they have very low energy reserves. And those energy reserves actually come from the way the queen was fed during gestation. I've seen it myself. Depending on how you feed them during gestation, it could be like 9-10 days when it comes to the vitality of the kittens right after birth. But the other mistake that I see very often in catteries is that we free feed them. That's almost the norm, which is not a good thing. We're going to come back to that. And we leave them to eat as much as they want. And if for any reason, I don't know, they are stressed and they become bulimic, or in some Maine Coons, I see that they eat as much as they can. They are almost like the Labradors of the cat world sometimes. When this happens, they might gain too much weight during gestation. And when they gain too much weight during gestation, there's another problem that can happen actually. It will have an impact on the strength of the uterine contractions. So this is a study done in humans, but the same is to be expected in cats. This is a normal pattern of uterine contractions. So you see they are regular, you see their strength, etc. But look at what happened when those individuals are overweight. The uterine contractions are not as strong. They are not as frequent. And in case of obesity, this is even worsened. So when you have those kind of patterns, like those two, it basically shows you that it's going to be more difficult for the female to deliver those kittens. And because of that, it's going to be, unfortunately, it's going to increase the risk of dystocia, difficulties to give birth. When this risk increases, another very important factor, another metric that I mentioned at the beginning is going to increase as well. It is the neonatal mortality rate. And when you understand that nutrition is not going to solve all the cases of dystocia, unfortunately, there are plenty of factors that are involved. But by controlling and monitoring nutrition during gestation properly, these are things you can potentially try to optimize there. And just want to draw your attention to this other situation. Look at what happens in underweight individuals. We have very strong contractions, but they look very close to each other. This is what we call a spastic contraction. And this spastic contraction basically means that the uterus is contracting in kind of an uncoordinated manner. And because of that, again, we might have an increased risk of dystocia because it doesn't contract properly. So overweight and underweight conditions can have an impact on how the female is going to deliver. And you see that this is something that we need to focus on before we breed those cats, but this is also something we need to focus on during the gestation as well. In dogs, we have recent studies that have shown us that actually, when a female is overweight, the newborn puppies are born with a low birth weight. And that's a very important thing, in my opinion. We're not sure if the same is true in cats, but who knows, it might be. But it tells you that what happens during gestation can have an influence on the development of those newborns. Low birth weight kittens are obviously more at risk for neonatal mortality. And optimizing the body condition and optimizing the way you feed during gestation can make a tremendous difference here. I have no doubt about this. And there's more to that. There are many, many, many reports today in dogs, in puppies and kittens on how the microbiome of those kittens develop. And I'm sure this is something you've heard about, the gut microbiome, especially this community of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that develop in the digestive tract of those kittens, and which are, by the way, going to influence the development of their immune system. It plays a role in the development of their behavior. It plays a role in weight management. Many scientists consider this gut microbiome more and more as almost an organ, a vital organ that is going to influence the entire development and the entire life of the kitten. The development of this microbiome actually starts even before those kittens are born. And one thing that influences the microbiome of the kittens is the microbiome of the mother. Actually, the microbiome of the mother is the microbiome of the kitten, is going to kind of mimic the microbiome of the mother. And from birth to 2 months of age, it's going to progressively develop until it gets as close as possible to the microbiome of the mother. But that tells us basically one thing. The way you feed the female during gestation is going to have an influence on this microbiome of the kittens. We have more and more studies that are presenting strategies on how to optimize the microbiome of the mother in order to optimize the gut microbiome of the kittens. And one of them, well, there are 2 of them that are that start to be documented, is whether using prebiotics during gestation. Prebiotics would be fibers like fructooligosaccharides, mannan oligosaccharides, or probiotics. Probiotics are live bacteria that we add on top of the food, or we have also some food that are supplemented with them. As I said, there are different strategies. All of them have been shown to bring benefits. My only recommendation here would be pick one and stick to it. Don't try to overdo things. Nutrition is also, it's a little bit like sex hormones. Actually, it's all about balance. I've seen many cases where people tell me, oh, we want to do that, so we're going to put prebiotics, probiotics, we're going to put them all together. When you do that, you might overstimulate the microbiome and therefore obtain the opposite of, develop the opposite of what you're actually trying to obtain. So I would really start by picking one strategy. Pick a diet supplemented with prebiotics. Go for probiotics if that's your option. But pick one and stick to it. And eventually fine-tune your approach with your veterinarian. We are at the beginning of something here, because I'm sure in the coming years we will have more and more strategies to help us better focus on that. I even see a point where we will start to select our breeding individuals based on the composition of their microbiome. We're not there yet, but that's really something to keep in mind, because if you use ways to optimize the microbiome of those animals, that will benefit the kittens on the long term. So something I really encourage you to keep in mind there. Because the nutrition during gestation is really, it's not only about the female, it's also about the foundation of kitten health. And I love math. Let's go back to this graph I showed you earlier, because I want to focus on this last part here, which is very essential. Lactation is the most demanding and the most energy demanding life stage. This is going to drain energy from the female. In cats, they are almost always going to lose weight during lactation. And you can see that, again, this is something you can monitor. You would like them to lose no more than 5 to 33% of their weight. That's something you can monitor. And that's something you want to slow as much as possible, because the faster they lose weight, the more impact it will have on their health, and the more it might complicate the lactation there. So in terms of nutrition, how do we address that? This is when we recommend to free feed the animal. This is actually the only time you will hear me saying you can free feed a queen there. Free feed with a growth diet, like a kitten diet, for instance. This is the moment to do so. I typically encourage you guys to use the same diet you're gonna use to win the kittens, simply because there's a cool phenomenon that happens. The aroma of the diet are diffusing in the milk, so the kittens are nursing on the mother, so they get kind of accustomed to the smell of this diet. And you know that kittens, there's kind of a nutritional education that happens with them. It's very fascinating to see how they start the weaning, because they will almost attack the plate of food at the same angle the mother does. So they will basically replicate what the mother does. So if the mother likes the food, and if they are used to the smell, because the smell is really what drives their food consumption, it's definitely going to make it easier for the weaning process. And it's also about monitoring. This is a picture of a female that gave birth at our cattery many years ago. And one thing which I always recommend you guys to do, on top of focusing on nutrition, focus on the health of the mammary glands. Take a look at the mammary glands every day. 4 pairs of mammary glands in the cat. Palpate them on a daily basis. Check to see if there's no sign of inflammation. Check to see if it's not painful. Check to see if the color of the milk looks normal. It should be white. If it's red, brown, green, that's not a good sign. That might tell you that there's a mastitis developing. And in the worst case, those mastitis can turn into what you can see here. This is a gangrenous mastitis. So it's a mastitis that turned into an abscess. The abscess burst. This one is not a very ugly one, to be honest, but sometimes you can have huge holes in the mammary gland parenchyma following those things. And when we deal with that, we always run into the discussion. In case of gangrenous mastitis, it's kind of a no-brainer. We have a gangrenous mastitis. All mastitis in cats are basically caused by bacteria. So when we deal with that, we will typically remove the kittens from the mother. We will stop the lactation. To stop the lactation today, we have medical protocols that are very efficient. And we will bottle feed the kittens, or we will try to wean them as early as possible. But when it's a normal mastitis, what do we do with that? Be aware that there's 2 schools of thought there. Some veterinarians will tell you, we will treat the mother and we will keep the kittens, we will let the kittens nurse on the mother. And another school of veterinarian will tell you, oh no, we treat the mother, we stop the lactation, and we bottle feed the kittens. I think it all depends on what you observe, because the risk is that if kittens are nursing on a mammary gland that on a mammary gland that contains too many bacteria, they might develop neonatal diarrhea. They might develop septicemia. It looks like something we call the toxic milk syndrome. You know, they nurse and then you're under the impression that they have pain, they cry after nursing. So that is always something that can happen. So I know on my end, very often, because I had many bad experiences, I typically say, I don't want to take any risk. I prefer to switch them to a milk replacer. But some of my colleagues, again, as I said, will let them nurse. I think it's always important, whichever thing you pick, to monitor the kitten and ensure that they're gaining weight. We're going to talk about that, but that they are also not developing those signs of diarrhea, especially. But really, during lactation, it's all about those two things, in my opinion. Feed freely. This is really when you can give them as much food as possible. But never forget to watch closely. I forgot to tell you, but mastitis sometimes is clinical, but we have evidence that we have things we call subclinical mastitis in cats, which means that the kittens might develop those signs of toxic meal syndrome. They might have this diarrhea, neonatal diarrhea. They might cry after nursing. You might find that their abdomen is tense. But when we look at the mother, we find no clinical sign at all. And today we don't really have a clear diagnostic tool to identify this problem. I think some studies have shown that we could eventually calculate the number of neutrophils in the milk, and that gives us an idea if there's a problem or not. But the thresholds are not there yet. And to be honest, most of them have been developed in dogs. I haven't seen anything yet in cats so far. So always watch closely, because this is a very critical period for the mother and for the kittens as well. So we talked about the gestation, we talked about the lactation, and as you can see, everything we did there is also all about, honestly, optimizing the health of those newborn kittens. And nutrition is going to be essential for those newborn kittens. The milk they receive, this is what is going to help them thrive. This is what is going to help them grow properly. But there's one thing I want to show you, and something which is very important in my opinion. And I work a lot with shelters, and in shelters, I keep telling them one very important thing to do when you have a litter of newborn kittens. Before doing anything, most of the kittens they have are orphan kittens, obviously. Check their body temperature before doing anything. And look at this. In this case, we had 4 kittens, and this is the body temperature of those kittens. So when I show you those numbers, look at them and imagine in your mind, what do you think? Do you think it's normal? Do you think, oh, it's terrible? Normal body temperature of an adult cat is 38, 39 degrees Celsius. Here we are around 36, 35. That's really below. They must be hypothermic. We must do something about that. So you see, those numbers are actually interesting, because when I used to show that to my veterinary students, and I must admit it was the same when I was a vet student, I thought there was a problem. But for kittens which are 1 week old, or for kittens right after birth, those numbers are totally normal, actually. The body temperature of a newborn kitten is below the normal body temperature of an adult cat. And that's a very, very important parameter to keep in mind, because kittens are prone to hypothermia. They cannot thermoregulate. They cannot regulate their own body temperature during the first 3 weeks of age. And this is typically what we want to see during the first week, second week, and third week. And the reason that is so important is because when kittens are hypothermic, they cannot digest. And very often what I see, especially in shelters, they have those kittens which have been abandoned, which are orphaned. And they get those kittens and they're like, oh, poor kittens, oh, we need to bottle feed them. They must be hungry. But they're hypothermic, so they cannot digest. And what happens is that they start to bloat, and then they die, because unfortunately the hypothermia was the initial problem that was not fixed there. And this is something you need to remember. When the body temperature of a newborn kitten is below 34 degrees Celsius, which is below 93 Fahrenheit, they cannot digest anymore. The digestive tract stops functioning. And this is when, typically, even if you bottle feed them, they're not going to be able to get anything. But there's a trick. Those kittens have a suckling reflex. And what I hear very often is that, well, doc, I don't need to do that. I will just put my finger in the mouth of the kitten. If it's suckled, it's good. There's no problem. They lose their suckling reflex when their body temperature is below 32 degrees Celsius. So sometimes we might be tricked. We might think, oh, they suckle, we can bottle feed them. But that's a reminder that before doing anything, when you have a newborn kitten that doesn't look well, always take their body temperature. And when you take their body temperature, then warm them up. There are plenty of techniques to warm up a kitten. You can use heat lamps like this very old picture that I show you there. They have their pros and cons. They are not the best in my opinion today, but you just go on Amazon and you find like plenty of options. We can use heat radiance. We can use, again, we have new heat lamps that we can actually calculate or determine the temperature that we will have just below the lamp. We have heating pads. Plenty of options are available, but whatever option you choose, this is typically what I would recommend. First week of age, first week of life of those kittens in the nest, we would like 30 degrees Celsius. Second week, 28. Third week, 25. And you have the corresponding data in Fahrenheit right next to this. And be aware that those numbers are empirical. This is what works best in my experience. Other of my colleagues will give you different numbers. Whatever happens, I want those numbers in the nest, not in the room. If you have 30 degrees in the room, the mother is just going to fly away. She's not going to stay around, and that's going to be a problem. You want that in the nest. If you have an incubator, that's also something you can use. You can buy some on Amazon these days. I've visited many catteries where they have an incubator. And what I love about the incubator is that you can control this parameter as well. When we want to focus on the environment in a maternity, those are really the two key parameters. And in terms of humidity, this is what you need to target. 55, more or less 10%. It's a very important one because when humidity is above 65%, when you have too much humidity, it increases the risk of bacterial contamination and bacterial development. When you're below 45, so when it's not humid enough, which actually is something that happened a lot, especially, I mean, here in Canada, I discovered that when you turn on the heat during winter, because you know how cold it is here, the humidity is decreasing drastically, and that increases the risk of dehydration. And those kittens are basically 82% water. So that's an important parameter to focus on as well. And today, when we detect a newborn kitten, which is at risk, this is one of the first things we recommend. Before doing anything, optimize, warm them up. And by the way, when you warm them up, please do not microwave them. Do not go too fast, I mean. Take your time. You need to warm them for 1 hour, 1.5 hours before attempting anything, before trying to bottle feed them. And monitor the humidity. A simple weather station costs nothing, and it can help you win big there because that's a simple tool that you can leverage to optimize the environment for your newborn kittens. And that's a very important takeaway because very often we think, those kittens, we need to feed them, we need to bottle feed them for any reason. But we forget that first we need to warm them. I was working at a shelter, and when I gave a similar presentation, they told me that, this hypothermia thing, they realized this is not something they were focusing on. And they started working on it. And their neonatal mortality rate dropped from 60% to 10%, just by focusing on this parameter. So again, this is something simple that I really encourage you to implement in all your catteries. Be aware that in puppies, we have more and more studies that are showing us how to monitor the health of newborn puppies. One of the key parameters is actually temperature. And what they do is that they recommend to check the temperature of the newborn puppies at 12, 24, and 48 hours. And if this temperature is below 36 degrees Celsius, which by Purr is 97 Fahrenheit, that means that there's a higher risk for those puppies to die during the neonatal period. And immediately, this puppy is flagged at risk, and we are going to optimize their environment and supplement them with energy. I haven't seen anything similar in kittens, but I think the same rings true there. That's definitely an approach to take until we have specific data for kittens. But temperature is a very critical factor that can actually help you identify if they require energy supplements. And nutrition during the neonatal period is all about supporting those kittens so that they gain weight. And the scale is really a tool I encourage you to have because it gives you so many interesting information. And the very first one that we must use the scale for is after you do everything about neonatal resuscitation, just weigh those kittens right after birth because you want to identify those kittens with a low birth weight. Recent studies have actually given us more insight on what is a low birth weight kitten in a specific breed. And we have today those data incorporated in certain softwares, like the software called Royal Star, that can really help you better follow those newborns right after birth. The reason it's so important is because of this new chapter of veterinary medicine, which is called DOHAD, which stands for Developmental Origin of Health and Disease. And there was this paper that was published recently that, again, really encourages us to rethink how we approach neonatal development, because it's not only about how we feed the kittens during the neonatal period, it's also about everything that happens before. I told you about the fact that the way we feed the mother is going to influence the microbiome of those kittens. It might influence their birth weight. We DOHAD, and have a look at this paper, it's actually very interesting, is really making us rethink how we use nutrition before even those kittens are born to optimize their health and their life as an adult. I was telling you about that earlier on, but for instance, this is a study we have in Labradors, and I'm not sure if the same in string kitten again, but I think it's a good way to think about it. Newborn puppies that are born with a low birth weight are actually 2 times more at risk of being overweight later in life. And that's kind of counterintuitive because they are low birth weight, and yet they are more predisposed to become overweight. This, we believe, is because they develop something we call the thrifty phenotype. During gestation, if you have a kitten born with a low birth weight, for instance, it means that during gestation, something was not correct. Maybe there was a problem at the level of the placenta. Maybe there were too many kittens and there were a lot of competition in the uterus for nutrient resources. But because of that, those individuals might develop metabolic adaptations. And those metabolic adaptations make them kind of more nutrient efficient. So imagine then they're born, they are in the outside world. And you, breeder, you detect that they are low birth weight, and you're like, but it means that they need more. So we need to supplement them and do whatever we can to better support them. And you might have noticed that very often those low birth weight kittens, they catch up. They grow up faster than the others, and they catch up with the others. But that might not be a good thing because they are more nutrient efficient. That's why they use them better, and they might therefore be more prone to develop overweight. So rule of thumb is a healthy kitten gains weight on a daily basis. Be aware that in the past we used to say, they can lose up to 10% of their initial body weight during the first 24 hours after birth. Today we know that this is a number we picked from human medicine. So my colleagues today say, healthy kitten must gain weight on a daily basis. They must gain weight. But that thing tells us that they should not gain too much weight. And the great news is, today we have neonatal growth charts for newborn kittens. So those neonatal growth charts were presented at the vet conference in Berlin in 2019. And today they are available in the software I mentioned, Royal Star. So you can monitor their weight, and it will send you alerts if they grow too fast, or if they do well. If they don't grow well, you can visualize it obviously, but if they grow too fast, it will send you alerts. And it really changes the way we approach it, you see, because in the past we said, they need to gain weight. Now we say they need to gain weight, but we don't want them to gain too much weight. And this is where, when you observe that, you can adapt your nutritional strategy. If they do not gain weight, you know that you need to supplement them. I always say, when we identify these kind of kittens, go optimize their environment, like we said before, and supplement them with a milk replacer. Wait 24 hours. If after 24 hours you see no improvement, go to see your veterinarian, because there might be something else there. But with kittens that are growing too fast, Now we can also say, oh, maybe they are they're making too much, they're drinking too much, or they are making too much good use of the milk. My approach today for those kittens would be also to go back to a milk replacer, because with the milk replacer I can actually control the food intake that they're receiving and kind of try to normalize their growth there. It's probably not perfect, but that's a way to start until we have better strategies in this matter. And that really emphasizes you the importance of the scale when it comes to nutrition. Nutrition, as I said, is about what, the diet, but also about how and how much. And the scale can really help you there, because it will help you fine-tune those two last parameters. And speaking of, I talked to you about milk replacers, and speaking about that one, 15 years ago, I had a a homemade recipe that I was sharing with my clients, because that was the best we had available. Today, I wouldn't do that anymore, because I think we have much better options. And I always recommend you guys to go for a dedicated feline milk replacer, a milk replacer made for cats. Many people, when I go on Facebook, I see they use goat's milk, etc. Be aware that goat's milk contains less energy, contains more lactose. I'm going to tell you why this is a big problem. But really, focus on a milk replacer that is made for those kittens. That will make a big difference. When you pick the milk replacer, be aware that the milk of the mother, especially in the cat, contains lots of oligosaccharides. And those oligosaccharides are actually prebiotics that are going to support the development of the microbiome. So I always encourage you to pick a milk replacer that contains prebiotics, like fructooligosaccharides, for instance, in order to optimize the development of this microbiome. But the first requirement is really to use a dedicated feline milk replacer, because that is the best fit for those specific neonates. And I'm a big I do prefer to use a powder-based milk replacer. So some people prefer the liquid milk replacers. Some of them, in some countries, you have access to those. They are more convenient because you don't have to dilute them, etc. But the reason I prefer the powder one is because we can actually play on a parameter called osmolality. So you see, this is what should typically happen when the kitten is digesting. The milk, the nutrients from the milk replacer get into the digestive tract and they're absorbed. That's what you want to see. But let's say you're using something like goat's milk. And I told you, goat's milk contains more lactose, and lactose has an hyperosmolar effect. So that's what it would look like somehow. And that's what will happen. It will create a call for water, and this call for water could potentially induce diarrhea. And neonatal diarrhea is never a good thing in newborn kittens. So I like milk replacers, powder-based milk replacers, because actually this osmolality thing, we can take advantage of it. We can take advantage of it because, for instance, if you see constipation in a newborn kitten, this means we want more water in the digestive tract. So what we will do is that when we will prepare the milk replacer, instead of using the normal volume of water recommended, we will use 80% of the volume of water recommended. Because by doing that, we will increase the osmolality. We will therefore create a call for water in the digestive tract. If we deal with neonatal diarrhea, we will do the opposite. We will use 120% of the volume of water required to prepare the milk replacer. And these numbers are not from me, by the way. These numbers are from the World Health Organization. That's what they use for neonatal diarrhea in human babies. And I've been using this for quite a while in shelters. And I love it when they call me back and say, "Hey, doc, you might speak funny, but your trick works." And that's something simple, a simple way for you to use those powder-based milk replacers to your advantage. But the reason those things happen, so I'm going to skip this one because this is something I like to show to the students to remind them that what is the right position to bottle feed a newborn kitten. And it's definitely the position B, definitely not the position B, sorry, because we do not bottle feed them like human babies. I'm sure you guys all know that, but that's a very important reminder. But one thing which is very, very important to keep in mind, is that I see many people telling me, oh, but when we use milk replacers, we have constipation problems, diarrhea. Typically, this happens because the milk replacer is not properly diluted. Actually, that's the number one mistake people do when they prepare a milk replacer, and not only in cats or puppies, it's in humans as well. Where if we over dilute or under dilute the powder, this is when we can see those things I mentioned before, diarrhea, constipation, because we mess up the osmolality of the product. So as I said, nutrition is about what, how, and how much, and the how is critical when it comes to milk replacer. So I really encourage you to follow the recommendations by the manufacturer, especially on how to dilute the product. Because if you do not dilute it well, this is when you can see constipation and all those stuff. And quick trick, the number of meals is obviously super important when it comes to newborn kittens. In the first week, we typically recommend 6 to 8 meals per day. If for any reason you have to deal with orphan kittens, one of the very common problem we have with orphan kittens is that sometimes they start to suckle on each other, and sometimes the suckling can be so intense that it leads to huge abscesses. To prevent that, very often when you see that, it means that they are hungry. So the best way to prevent that is not to increase the quantity of milk you give them, because by doing so, you might overload their digestive capacity, but you increase the number of meals so that actually they feel fuller for a longer period of time. If you were to feed them 8 times a day during the first week after birth, then you will feed them 10 times a day. And that's something I use a lot in shelters with great success. Oh, sure, it's more time consuming, but when you have to bottle feed a litter of newborn kittens, I'm sure you guys know, this is a lot of, this is a big commitment. I was lucky at the vet school, I had vet students to do that for me, especially in the middle of the night. But you see my point. This is something simple, again, that can make a big difference. And do not forget, after you bottle feed a newborn, you need to stimulate them for defecation and miction. This is a reflex typically induced by the mother, which is leaking the perineal area. So this is something that you must do after each meal. So typically they should defecate and urinate almost each time you stimulate them. Sometimes they can skip. You can skip one meal. I mean, you feed them, you stimulate them. There's nothing. But if after 2 consecutive meals there's nothing that comes out, especially in terms of feces, there might be a potential problem. And this is where you can potentially play around with the concentration of the milk replacer, as I said before. But always follow my 24-hour rule. If you implement something and there's no improvement after 24 hours, go consult with your veterinarian. And very quickly, I'm going to finish on this one, which is in my opinion is critical. A few years ago, I had a cat breeder calling me, and she said, "Doc, I don't understand. I have big issues with my kittens at the time of weaning. They have diarrhea." Very common challenge we see in breeding cat with. And she said, "I don't understand, Doc. They have diarrhea, but I mean, I do the right thing. I give them a therapeutic GI diet, and on top of that, I give them prebiotics, probiotics, psyllium seed, pumpkin," and the list was going on and on and on and on and on. So weaning diarrhea is a multifactorial problem. You need to take into consideration elements of environmental control, pathogens, but nutrition is a key aspect. And remember what I said about the microbiome earlier. Nutrition is all about balance. If you give too much of a good thing, it might overstimulate the digestive tract, and you might get the exact opposite of what you expect. When it comes to nutrition and weaning, I really encourage you to pick a specific weaning diet. And then when it comes to weaning, there's a number you need to remember. 4 is a magic number. You start weaning, typically, this transition from milk to solid food, when those kittens are 4 weeks of age. Before that, their digestive tract might not be mature enough yet to handle this kind of transition. Weaning is a progressive process. It should be smooth and progressive. So spread it over 4 weeks. Don't rush things there. And weaning is also about decreasing as much as possible the digestive workload. So when we wean kittens, I would typically recommend to feed them 4 meals per day, actually. And 4 meals per day is because of this study. Okay, it was done in puppies, but that's still something that is worth using in the sense that if we feed them with 4 meals per day, we increase the quality of the stools there. And that's something I've been implementing in many catteries, and again, with great success. So something simple. That might be that might require much more work on your end for sure, but again, simple thing that can make a big difference. And when we wean those kittens, remember that at the beginning of the weaning process, at 4 weeks, they are not able to chew yet. So you want to make sure that this transition is as progressive as possible. I like weaning diets that are rehydratable because you mix it with water, it turns into a mush, and then at the beginning of the process, they can basically just lick it. And the first week, typically, I will mix those diets with this ratio: 1 volume of kibble for 2 volumes of water, or even better, milk replacer. Again, to make the process as smooth as possible. And I will progressively decrease the ratio of liquid I put on top of that. As you can see, second week, 1:1. Third week, 1 volume of kibble for 0.5 volume of water. And then when we get to the 4th week, basically, I just feed dry kibble. But you can see the idea. We want to make this as smooth as possible. A very important point when it comes to the diet. It has been shown in kittens that we always see cats, they're obligate carnivores. They need lots of proteins. But actually, the development of the microbiome in kittens performs better if we give a diet with a moderate protein, moderate carbohydrate ratio. So these tiny elements can make a big difference as well. So nutrition done right during weaning is really a key element. I met many breeders who were telling me, but we let the kittens decide when they are ready to be weaned. We allow them to eat when they want, actually, the dry kibble. A few years ago, I went around and I asked all teachers in nutrition what were their favorite nutritional weaning protocol. To be totally transparent, none of them gave me the same answer, which means that it's really still an open book. The approach I showed you here is the one I recommend in catteries when they call me for weaning diarrhea issues. And in terms of nutrition, I have great success with it. If what you're doing today works for you, I usually do not encourage you to change it. I encourage you to think about what I said about the protein carb ratio, which has an influence on the microbiome development. But the weaning process is something we need to change in case you have a higher risk of weaning diarrhea, or if it's a problem you observe very often. That's something we can tweak. And as I said, the one I showed you is the one I use in practice with very good success. So that's what I wanted to tell you about nutrition and reproduction. So remember, at the beginning, I showed you those 3 dashboards. And as you can see, nutrition is not the magic recipe that is going to boost all your numbers. I'm not going to tell you, use this nutrition and you will have more kittens. Use this nutrition, you will have less problem when they give birth. Use this nutrition and you will have less neonatal mortality. However, it can optimize all of those numbers. It can really help you better control the influence of nutrition on these problems. Because nutrition is something you do in your catteries. You're in charge of the nutrition. So I think, as I said, the key element to remember here is really that it's about those 3 things. What do you feed? Pick the diet that will do the trick there. How will you use it? This is the key. I can give you the best diet ever. If you do not use it properly, you will see no benefit at all. And how much? Which is very important in catteries, because very often people say, oh, we free feed all the time. Free feeding might not be the best option. This is something you can control. And this is something where I really encourage you to put some efforts in. And it's important because I like this sentence from the World Health Organization. If we change the beginning of the story, we change the whole story. With nutrition, you can influence the beginning of the story of those kittens, even before they are born. That's what Dohad tells us. So keep this in mind. This morning, I shared with you some tips and tricks, some elements. As you can see, it's not rocket science, but those are practical stuff. And I can guarantee you, if you use just one of those things, it can make a tremendous difference. So thank you very much. Don't hesitate to connect to find out more with the QR code that pops up on the screen. And that's what I wanted to share with you this morning. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fontaine, for the amazing presentation. We actually have quite a few questions, if you have a little bit of time to answer some of those, please.
I do, yes. Let me just move. Oops. And here I am. Yes.
Perfect. Since nutrition has been a popular topic, so number one question is, what would you define as overweight in Maine Coon? Because some of them have really strong and big, bodies, and so they would like to just see how to really recognize that those cats are overweight. So if you can maybe clarify the body condition scoring again.
Sure. So, and actually, I was going to say, the way I would clarify it is go back to the body condition score. Go on this WSAVA website. You type WSAVA body condition score chart cat. And below those numbers I showed you, there is a description of what is considered as overweight. It's about the evaluation of the profiles, of the amount of fat you have around the ribs, and it is explained on this paper. If it's not clear on your hand, and again, remember, it's a qualitative evaluation, this is where I encourage you to discuss it with your veterinarian. They do that all the time, so they might have a better way they will be able to teach you and to show you how to do that, and how to evaluate this parameter. And in the future, I'm almost sure that we will have a tool. You will just take a picture for a specific breed, and it will tell you the body condition score of the individual. Can't wait for that, actually.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Yeah, I think, we struggle with that with dogs, of course, because they have all these different breeds, but I think we really underestimate the different breeds in cats, because always I personally, as a vet, do not like when people just say, 5 milligrams per cat. And I'm like, well, we have a 6, 7, 8 kilo Maine Coons, and then we have a 2.5 kilo like Devon Rex. I really do not like the dosing per cat, because I think they still differ quite a lot. Okay, next question is actually on raw feeding. So someone is feeding a balanced raw diet to the cats, and they're just asking if there is any supplement you would recommend when they are raw feeding pregnant or nursing queen. And yes, and then I think she mentions her balance ratio between meat, bone, and organs is usually between 75, 15, 10 or 80, 10, 10. So I know, I personally, when it comes to raw feeding, especially with pregnant and nursing queens, I find it quite challenging, because I think they have a little bit different immune systems than other cats. And unfortunately, I've seen kittens with listeriosis, with mycobacteriosis and everything. So I always find it a little bit risky to feed it to pregnant cats. But that's from my infectious standpoint view. But I just think it would be good to mention if there are any supplements we should be giving those pregnant and nursing queens if breeders want to feed raw.
So, and I'm with you on the infectious part. I come from a tropical island, so that's why for us, eating food that is raw is always a big no-no because of the risk of infectious diseases. But let's just focus on nutrition here. When it comes to nutrition, the key element that you want to put in the queen during gestation is energy, because you want more proteins, more vitamins, more minerals, of course, but you also want more energy. And that might be a challenge with raw feeding, because when the uterus gets bigger, it compresses the stomach. And because the stomach is compressed, it's very difficult for the animal to receive as much energy as she needs, because with a raw diet, you will typically need a bigger volume to achieve this kind of energy. So I don't see a specific supplement here to add. Basically, if we should tailor it to the nutritional requirements of a female during gestation. But I'm concerned about the energy that they require, because let's say it's balanced, it would mean that you need to increase every week by plus 10% the amount of food this queen is eating. Can she do that and still consume her entire diet? I wonder. That might be a challenge. So that's my personal recommendation. One thing I do think that would be beneficial is anything that could support the microbiome there. A probiotic, a prebiotic, because we know that this is something that's going to have an impact on the microbiome of newborn kittens. But that's how I would approach it today.
And I think that's a great question. Actually, the next question is about prebiotics, and specifically asking if there is any specific pro and prebiotic that would be best for helping kittens, or even potentially when the queens or kittens need antibiotics.
So two things there. So in terms of prebiotics versus probiotics, honestly, many options have been described in the market. I would pick one that had made this proof. It's important to, when it comes to probiotic, let's start with those ones. Not all of them are made equal. There are studies showing that, for instance, certain strain of lactobacillus, you can give them, it has no effect. But other strains of enterobacterium, if I'm correct, have a positive impact. So first pick one that is backed up by scientific research, or use a diet that is already supplemented with prebiotics, for instance. This is something we see very often, and this is typically what I would prefer to recommend, because with supplements, sometimes we forgot to put them on top. In today, though, to be fair, it's a matter of compliance. So in terms of compliance, I always prefer the solution which is all in one. There's no real comparison today between what is the best approach. Maybe in the future we will have that. Today I recommend to pick one approach and stick to it. That's how I would approach it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I always find it, because with some of the probiotics, like some of them the cats really don't want to eat, right, when it's mixed in the food. Some of them you have to pill the cat. So it's always, we've had those behavioral talks before, and I'm like, every time we can avoid pilling those cats and giving them something extra, it's always helpful. A couple more questions if you still have time to be with us. There is a breeder who has issues when she has larger litters, so more kittens in the litter, so that they would all have enough energy and maintain their weight. Because when she has smaller litters, those kittens usually like grow really well, but it can be sometimes challenging when we have those big litters with like Maine Coons, for example, and other breeds where there are just too many. So she's just asking for any strategies you would recommend for those big litters.
Well, this one is simple, actually, and I can confirm that I have seen studies in dogs, not in cats yet, but in dogs, we know that when we have a large litter, automatically we will have 30% of those puppies that will be born with a low birth weight, simply because of this uterine competition thing. They don't have as much space to grow in the uterus. And what we do in those low birth weight puppies, and that's what I would recommend in those kittens. First thing, weight them right after birth in order to identify those with a low birth weight. And when you identify one, those kittens you must optimize their environment, and you must supplement them with energy. Typically, we will do that with a milk replacer. So that's how I approach it today. As soon as we detect those kittens at risk, we would do that and monitor them. In the past, again, we were just weighting them and we were ensuring that they would gain weight. Now we have those neonatal growth charts. I'm still waiting for them to be available in a little booklet for kittens, but I heard that it will become available in 2024, so stay tuned for that. But at least it is available on the Royal Start software at the moment, so that's still a good start in my opinion. But that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I'm always I know some breeders don't weigh their kittens. I at least twice a day, like I need to know. I'm always a control freak when it comes to my litters. There is another question about actually probiotics. So there is actually a question if potentially doing either pro or prebiotic alone might be less beneficial than using a symbiotic. And just what are your thoughts on that?
The same as before. It's there are few studies. Some studies are using symbiotics on a diet that is not supplemented. Other studies are using a diet supplemented with prebiotics or a diet supplemented with probiotics. I've never seen a study comparing all the different options to each other. So if one study is if one thing is described like it says it works, I would give it a try. The only caution I would say as before is do not try to put everything together, because then you overstimulate the microbiome and you might get the total opposite effect.
Okay. And thank you. There's one more question that's actually on the opposite when we discussed the obese cats before, but I personally struggle with this as well. When the females go a lot into heat, they actually seem to lose weight. So this is a question, what would you recommend to maintain a good weight in those females that are in heat often?
Okay, well, that's always a good question. And I think this is where you can use nutrition to your advantage. If the females, if you want to maintain their weight, it means you need to give them a more energy dense diet. So pick a diet that is more energy dense, maybe a kitten diet, for instance, and maybe that is worth feeding them this all the time, as long as you monitor their weight gain and make sure that they stick to it. The other way to control this, and I think Petra, you are the one who discussed this topic, but is to use chemical sterilization. I'm a big fan, especially in those females that are cycling way too often, because then people are telling me, oh, but they're losing weight, their hair is not good, and all those problems. In Europe and in Canada recently now, we have access to deslorelin implants. And that's something I was using in some cases. The problem with the deslorelin implant is that you put the implant and then you don't know when they will potentially come back in season. It could be a year and a half, even more in certain individuals. Or you use melatonin implants. Those ones are more widely available. We have them in North America, we have them in Europe. They're a little bit more complex to use, and not all queens respond the same, and we can usually do not use them. It does not really work well when you use them back to back, but this will increase the inter-oestrus period, and that could help actually to help them go back to their optimal weight and maintain actually this optimal weight.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great suggestion. Yeah, we will be discussing actually after break a lot of possible options and the benefits, but also a lot of the individual variations when using melatonin and supplement. And so, yeah, but I actually like feeding like the queen diets and stuff to my females that are actually in heat and, you know, not really pregnant, because it is definitely a challenge, especially if you want to show them and then they get very skinny.
Yes.
Yeah, a couple more questions. And there is some kitten canned food pate is being manufactured with some of cow's milk, and if this is a concern for you, if this is still healthy.
If it's made for kittens, it means that the nutritional profile of those diets has been adapted to the scientific recommendation we have for this specific species. So the ingredient they use might be called cow's milk. However, the portion they might be using will help you actually get exactly the amount of the different nutrients that you want in the end. So I would not be concerned here. When I'm concerned is that when we're using like raw goat milk or cow's milk that we buy at the grocery, because this hasn't been fine-tuned for a kitten. And then this is where we potentially see those problems, because it contains too much lactose, etc. If it's in a product made for kitten, it should fit the nutritional recommendation we have for those specific kittens. So I wouldn't be concerned there.
Okay, sounds great. Two more questions actually on milk and milk replacement. So one question is about the optimum temperature for milk replacement.
So the optimal temperature should be typically around 37, 38 degrees Celsius. So typically we recommend you to warm the milk, then you drop the milk on your end, and it should be lukewarm. It should not be super hot, shouldn't be cold, should be lukewarm.
Perfect. Yeah, just for the friends in our breeders in America, 36 is about 96.8 Fahrenheit, and 37 is about 98.6 degrees of Fahrenheit. And then
thank you for doing the conversion.
Yes,
That's something I can do in my head.
I struggled so much with Fahrenheit when I moved to US, and I still struggle a lot. So just last question, that some breeders are using the Royal Canyon puppy milk right now if the Royal Canyon kitten milk is not available. Is it a good, safe, temporary solution? Or, can we keep feeding the puppy milk to those kittens, or are there some risks associated with that?
You guys want to put me in trouble. So I'm going to give you the scientific answer here. Scientific answer is yes, it's something you can use in kittens, because the baby dog milk and the baby cat milk are the same formula. So because today, when we look at the scientific publications that have been done on the feline milk and the dog milk, they are actually very similar in many ways. And this nutritional solution actually will work. We do not recommend to feed the same amounts, obviously, but the solution in itself, the nutritional solution in itself is the same. What will change is the bottle that come with the product, the feeding guidelines, and the recommendations. But the product in itself is the same. So it's safe to use in kittens. We do that all the time.
Okay, great. As long as it's adjusted to the volume. Okay. And then there was another question. There was an issue with some batch of kitten food causing intestinal issues, and the manufacturer said the kitten food was required to be tested for only 2 weeks, and adult food is required to be tested for 6 months. I'm not sure if I really understand this question very well. So I don't know if can be maybe a little clarified. I don't know if you understand it.
Not entirely, but what I would recommend when we have when you guys have a doubt on a potential product, what I would always recommend you guys to do is to reach out to the customer care. On each bag of food, you have a phone number that says call us, and it's the customer care number. So don't hesitate to call and discuss your concern, because with this, they can actually go back and verify if there is indeed an issue as well. I mean, all companies are taking lots of precautions to avoid all those kind of issues. I know we do that at Royal Canin. We have a very stringent quality control process, and all companies have something similar. Well, maybe not to the same level, but you get the idea. So I really encourage you to directly connect with the company so that they can try to understand what's going on and help you out there. That would be the best approach, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I know. I actually visited the factory in France from Royal Canyon in this fall, and yeah, I was a lot of control everywhere.
Yes, it's actually, yep. I've never seen that. I visited some human manufacturing plant, and actually, it felt definitely different. I would feel safer.
I definitely did much quality control on my own food, so I was really excited about that. Okay. Okay, this means, okay, I still am not really understanding the questions, but the questions is like, if the kitten food undergoes, I think, different like testing procedure than adult food, I think this probably would depend on a company. I don't know. Do you guys test differently kitten and adult food?
So there will be different tests to assess the quality of the diet, but then the quality control tests are done before production and after production. So ultimately, it's all about the tests you will be doing. It's kind of the same approach in the end.
Okay, yeah, I don't know if it's meant in some AFCO terminology, if there's like a different requirement, but yeah, I am not sure. I am pretty sure the kitten food should be under the same testing like adult food before it gets salt. But yeah, I think maybe even more like, you know, stricter process since it's for kittens. But yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for your talk. We really, really enjoyed it. I think it was very interesting. And